Hey everyone, welcome to Ashley Land. I'm super excited about this election series that I have going on here called the Our Revolution Is Now. We're going to be talking about some topics that range from local elections, national elections, voter suppression, and Black Lives Matter and what the Black agenda looks like during this time. And so to kick things off, we are talking about local elections, and I have two amazing, brilliant people here to walk us through everything. And so I'm going to toss it to them to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosemary Molina. You can call me Rose. I'm with the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. I run the organizing department there, and before that, I was the Civic Engagement Director of Community Coalition, or COCO, in South LA.
Hi everyone, I'm Hugo Romero. I'm the political coordinator at the LA County Federation of Labor. Thank you, Ashley, for hosting us. I wish I had a cool last name that fits into a whole show like Ashley Land. That is so awesome, and we look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. I'm super excited to have you all here. I know you all are going to have great perspectives. And so if you all have questions at home, make sure you drop them in the chat so that we can get to them at the end. But right now, we are going to start with some questions that I have, and I'm sure you all will benefit from as well. And so I'm going to first ask Ugo, can you explain a little bit about how local government works, specifically in California? What is like the decision-making process? How does like the hierarchy of people like go?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you're asking that because even for those of us that are involved in the day-to-day stuff, politics and government, some of it can get very confusing, right? So when you put it in the context of, especially November 2020, and just folks getting involved who traditionally have been disenfranchised or not engaged in the system, sometimes you don't want to partake in something you don't understand, right? I often point to instruments. I've never been good with instruments. So I just don't touch instruments because I just don't get them. I'm not wired that way. So sometimes I think of local government that way. And so it's important that I'm glad you're asking that question on how it works to hopefully get folks involved a little more in participating in the voting process if we get to know. So one of the things I just want to break down, right, is, for instance, LA County Board of Supervisors, which is just a massive government structure here in LA. Any given supervisorial district is bigger than most states just in population in terms of who they represent, right? And so we elect 5 of them in LA County. But we also elect grand juries at the supervisorial district. We elect the sheriff. We elect the LA County District Attorney. We elect the LA County Assessor, right? And for something like City of LA, it's a bit different in that we elect 15 council members. We elect the mayor. We elect the city attorney. We elect the controller. And just some of the key differences just in how things different work, right? I just want to bring it back to some relevant examples is frustration over, say, law enforcement, right? And police. For, say, LA City, the position of, say, Michael Moore, that's an appointment by the mayor, right? We don't elect the chief of police in the city of LA. Whereas this, let's say the sheriff, that's someone folks vote in LA County level, 2 different departments, law enforcement. But in terms of just when you talk accountability and the power of the electorate, it does differ, right? In terms of who you have leverage over, say the mayor or directly in voting someone in or out. There's just someone I want to point out, right? But more broadly, let's say at the board of supervisor level, there's also just a lot of appointments that go in. For instance, say parks and recreation, right? How does that get chosen when we have communities who have no green space? And we know everything that rolls down when communities don't have access to areas where they can run and have, do recreational activities or families and for youth to go play after school, right? And that's something that LA County Board of Supervisors, who the director is and who voices and structures things in such a way so that there's equity in green space. And so it's important to get plugged in and just break down how these things function, because it's really easy to get lost in these systems. And as much as we can track them down and point to key leverage points, it's very beneficial to it. We also have a huge educational system, right, with LAUSD, which extends into areas of Southeast LA, like Cudahy, for instance, a lot of the city of LA. And then sometimes you have local school government. So you got to figure out, is my school part of LAUSD, or does it have its own unified school district? How do I make sure my kids or my community's youth have good representation at the educational level? So all of these systems, you can really break down. It's important to really track down, Ashley. But I don't know if you have a specific question, any given them, but there's a lot of appointments that go into these seats. But I just wanted to highlight just some of those examples, right? Because there's some you can get appointed, some you can get elected, some they have to vote in. But I guess what I want to emphasize, that at any level of any of these, at the top of the food chain is the electorate, right? That's the ultimate power, and that's why it's important to vote, because at the very top of all this is the electorate, whether we vote them in or we vote the people who appoint folks in.
Sorry, I was on mute. Definitely, that's super, super important to know. There's so many different branches of just like local government that rule over different things. And so I think that, from being from Chicago, like I don't think that we have like a board of supervisors, or it's either called something different. And I know we have like city council, and then like the board of supervisors, and then like the state people, like the Congress people and the Senate. And so I think it's really important to know like what each one of those like different facets does, and you broke it down really well. So super, super grateful for that. Rose, you know all about local elections. You're so knowledgeable. But some people really just think about, they only vote like every 4 years for like the presidential election. But like, why is it so important to partake in local elections?
I think local elections are important because it's where you get to make a difference in your everyday life based on what happens locally. You get to actually see what happens in your city or your neighborhood or your county based on things locally. And you can see the impact a little more clearly, I think, than some of these federal measures, right? Some stuff that happens in Congress. This is in your neighborhood. And what's interesting about local elections is it doesn't take a lot to get things done. Like there are elections that people win by just hundreds of votes when there are over 9 million people in LA. So just imagine that. I also think that in local elections, people count on people not paying attention. People count on getting things passed in between those presidential years, things that we're not paying attention to that really impact our lives. And so a lot of this has to do with where resources go. Any one budget locally can be in the millions of dollars. And we should have a say in it. But if you're not paying attention, you're not going to have a say. So what happens is a lot of the times just 10% of folks elect what's going to happen policy-wise or what's going to happen elected official-wise. And so if only 10% of the people are participating in local elections, that means only 10% of people are being represented based on what their values are, right? So it's important because it hits us every day, because we have a say on the minutia, on the little things that happen to us daily, like green space, like the person that's going to say whether we have a stop sign or a street lamp, like the person that's going to say what our jail system is going to look like and how that's going to be funded, that maybe our brothers and sisters or people like my father are going to go through. These are the things we get to have a vote and a say on locally. And that's why they're important. We can't not pay attention to it because it really does impact us.
Yeah, I think like people forget that like locally, like we have like some of the most power. Like we are very, like the people who run like our local politics are very accessible, and they work for us. And so we should be making sure that our voices are heard at the like ballot, or like just like at things like city hall meetings and all those different things, like that stuff that people can get engaged with on a daily basis.
That's right. Because even in local elections, even if you're not the one being able to vote, you're voting for the person who does get to vote. So for example, city council, they're the ones that passed the minimum wage back in 2015, which is now $15 an hour. So those 15 people had votes for millions of people, but who do you think gets to tell them how they should vote? It's us. And so if we're silent, if we're not talking to our elected representatives, even on issues that we don't get to vote on directly, they do, then our voice isn't being heard through them. So it is really important to be involved.
Exactly. So I know you all, I don't know if you all have been seeing all of the like ads for like all the propositions and initiatives on the ballot. There's quite a few of them, and I just wanted to see if you all could talk a little bit about some of the key ballot initiatives that we should be paying attention to very closely during this election cycle.
Absolutely. Yes, there are millions and millions of dollars going into uh, just a tax on measures that benefit workers and communities across California, right, Ashley? And I think one of the big ones, I think that's a priority for us and for a lot of the community, right, is Prop 15, which we are encouraging a yes on, along with teachers and Democratic Party and what have you. And what it is, right, is it closes a corporate tax loophole on Prop 13, and that'll bring billions of dollars back to communities and schools, right, and city governments. A lot of local municipalities have been strapped because companies like Disneyland, for instance, who, by the way, just laid off thousands of workers in the middle of a pandemic, and have actively lobbied against this, and Chevron. They're trying to make sure that they continue to benefit from these tax loopholes. And the reality is and I want to inform the community about this, is they're trying to scare people and deploy the traditional scare tactics to make sure that to try to get folks to vote no on it, right? So I just want to close some of those scare tactics. And one of them is that it does not, touch homeowners and small folks. It's largely going to large corporations and non-residential businesses. So, for instance, the most expensive 10% of non-residential businesses properties account for 92% of Prop 15's loophole closing revenues, right? So that's important because this is all to help small communities and schools and bring back those resources, right? Another one I think that's a scare tactic is probably the one that'll hurt small businesses. And I think that's really important for communities of color, especially for a lot of us, right? We know that a lot of small businesses, especially small businesses owned by folks of color, are really important. We don't want to hurt that. So the reality is that Prop 15 provides a tax cut for small businesses, right? Because it eliminates the business personal property tax that small businesses pay on their equipment and fixtures. So it actually provides a tax cut for these small businesses. And it specifically exempts all businesses operated out of, say, a home. So I really want to emphasize that this closes a corporate tax loophole, and the folks paying for this are folks who have paid the same rate since the late 70s. While, say, new homeowners like ourselves are paying our fair share. So this is to make sure corporations pay their fair share. And this brings billions of dollars back to classrooms. And we've seen the major need that brings, but also to small governments that provide jobs and city services that are so desperately needed, specifically in our communities of color.
And there are a few more initiatives we want to talk about. One of them is Prop 16. And there are not as many commercials on Prop 16 as there are on some of the other measures, but I would argue it's one of the most important ballot measures we've had to vote on in my lifetime. I think it's that important to me. And so what Prop 16 would do is bring back affirmative action, which was banned in the 90s by Prop 209. It made affirmative action essentially illegal in California. And what that's done is really brought down the equality and the equity that we see in a lot of our spaces. So I went to a public university. I went to UCLA. I did not see a lot of people that looked like me or that looked like Ashley. There are not a whole lot of people of color. And that's because they stopped doing affirmative action a decade before I got into school. Right now, what we're seeing in Los Angeles, The Black population has the highest rates of incarceration, the highest rates of homelessness, some of the highest early death rates because of lack of access to food and medicine. There is extreme inequity, and that's just a fact. These are statistics, these are numbers, these are real people's lives. We can have measures that address that inequity and bring equity back. So, for example, we could create workforce pipelines for Black folks to obtain public sector jobs, which historically have helped bring the Black community into the middle class. However, because of the lack of affirmative action and Prop 209, we cannot explicitly say that these jobs should go to Black people. We cannot have these types of diversity requirements in our public institutions to bring equity, even when there's vast inequity that we can prove. So what Prop 16 would do is it would allow us to say, hey, some folks, if the merits are equal, should be brought into these spaces, right? We can have diversity pipelines. We can make sure that there are Black and brown folks, just like there are enough white folks in these institutions, in these jobs. We can be intentional about how we address inequity. So that's why Prop 16 is so important, is we do need this. There are real inequities, and we could systematically address them in a more powerful and impactful way if we vote yes on Prop 16. There's a lot of good information about it. People said back in the 90s that affirmative action wasn't meant to be permanent. It was meant to exist until the systems were back in equal order. And I would argue that they never got back to there, right? They never got back to equal order. So this is one of those things we could do.
Amazing. I have not heard anything about Prop 16. So this is like great, valuable information, because I think that's totally on point with like affirmative action and like just how like communities of color are always, set back like so many spaces, and like just making sure that we have an equitable like playing field is like so important. And I know that Prop 22 is also one that is like very much, I keep hearing like controversial things about. Like I see like yes and no from two different people. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I should address this, Ashley, and I know Rose will chime in too, but you're hearing yes from 4 big companies: Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart, who are spending $184 million to exploit workers. So if you're hearing yes, just know you're hearing it from 4 companies who are pouring in to make it the most expensive campaign in the history of California. $184 million to exploit their workers. So the key here is to beat that messaging and beat the money, and we know we have in the past, and we're looking to do again. But the reality is that they are lying to try to get special exemptions, right? We're seeing a pattern here with 15, with 22, of corporations trying to cheat the system and have their own special privileges, right? And it ties back to the president only paying $750 in federal taxes, billionaires and corporations with their own exemptions. So that's just simply not true. So let me debunk, because I think there are some everybody knows someone who has Lyfted or Uber, or maybe has done it themselves, right? And so there's a legitimate concern about, well, people do this as a side thing, and you don't want to hurt people you love or know. But the folks hurting them are the companies themselves, right? So one of the things is, well, we don't want folks to lose their the flexibility or the ability to do this again. And Prop 22 or the current law does not prohibit the employer from giving that flexibility. This is about protecting the rights of employees from anything from sexual harassment, paid sick leave, disability, unemployment insurance, and what have you, which we've seen is so needed during the pandemic. COVID-19 has really exposed the need for these type of safety nets and for corporations to pay into these systems, right? Because as we pay into them, all of ourselves, why shouldn't Uber and Lyft do so? And so they should really do that. So there's nothing that would hurt anyone's ability to do those shifts. What would happen is that instead of a guaranteed, if a yes on 22 were to pass, it would guarantee a minimum wage of $5 and some change, right? If we get to no on 22, it would give them the legally minimum wage that folks are entitled to and we have all collectively fought for. That's the difference, because that's what we're fighting for. It's not, we would only fight for something that benefits workers and not hurts workers. And just, come show these companies would rather spend all this money on no on 22 than actually give back to their workers. So that's a really big point. We want to just emphasize that there's nothing that prohibits the flexibility, but rather guarantees them all the safety nets that employees, California and the labor movement and just broader community partners really have fought for in terms of worker protections and guaranteeing them. So that's why we're a firm no on 22 and want community to join us in that and beat the deceptive ads that and mailers and texts that folks have been getting on 22.
Yes, I think that breakdown was just so crucial. Like, cause I just literally was like, okay, some people are saying yes, some people are no. But like how you mentioned, there's like a pattern of like billionaires and like corporations trying to like continue to just like profit off of the backs of like communities of color and just like regular people is just so telling. And like the fact that they're spending billions on these campaigns when they could literally just be putting that money back into their workers or their community, like that's just super important to know and super important to have knowledge of when you're going to cast your ballot in November. And so, yes, and I think that you all also had just some points about Measure RR, because I know like they're like statewide, because I think those are like local ones for like LA City, and then like there are statewide measures as well. Is that right?
That's right. Before we move on, Rose, did you want to add anything to 22?
Yeah, I just want to like kind of drive home 22 because it's really confusing. The way that it's
Yeah.
messaged, the way it's written, it doesn't seem like it's a bad thing, but it's dangerous in a few ways. One of the things that we relate, or I'll say me, that I relate the rideshare driving to, or what they're trying to build a model like, is sharecropping. And I don't know if that's a little controversial, but if folks were to look at that model where back in the day, you had these white former plantation owners that would allow poor black and white laborers to work on the land. Now, those laborers had to pay for the entire cost of the farming themselves, and the farmers would allow them to get a little bit of the proceeds from whatever they harvested. But if something went wrong with the crop or the farm, it was on those farmers, not the owner of that land, to take care of it. So this is very similar to what this digital platform is doing. You go do all these ride shares on this platform, and most of the money goes back to Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and Instacart. You get to keep a small portion of it, but you're paying for the cost of the fuel. You're paying for your insurance. You're paying if you and your people in your car get in a car accident. You have all of these liabilities and you're not getting anything back for it. And who's really profiting at the end of the day? Is it you that's getting that little bit of money in your pocket, right, that you desperately need? Or is it the company that's becoming billionaires off of it? And so it's a very similar model, and I encourage people to look into it. I've heard some folks on social media call it rideshare cropping, but all we're trying to do is even out the playing field so that people get the money and the type of employment that they really deserve. That's all we're trying to do. And why this is so important now to beat back is because corporations and these billionaires and soon to be trillionaires, some of them are looking at this model to replicate it. How can we have someone work for us, exploit their labor, not have to pay them health care, not have to pay for the things that they and their family and their community need to survive, and get the most out of them? And that's really what capitalism is trying to do, but these folks are winning that game by trying to trick us and to vote for things against our own self-interest, like Prop 22. So we're a real firm no on Prop 22, not just for what it means to rideshare drivers now, but for what it means for industry and workers going well into the future. Because if they win this, it's going to be a replicable model down the road. And that's just dangerous.
Very.
Thanks.
Yeah.
But yeah, RR, Ashley, I'm so glad you brought up Measure RR because it's just in all these statewide props. Sometimes back to the initial point where we started this conversation, locally, just in our own backyard, there's stuff we can vote on to make tangible change. And one of those is an LA Unified School District bond called Measure RR that should be on folks' ballot. Anyone that is part of LA Unified School District uh, jurisdiction. And so what it is, it's a $7 billion bond. Now I know for a lot of folks, there is tax fatigue, right? However, good news, this is not a tax. So folks' taxes are not going up. This is an extension of something that's already in place. And why is this important? If you could believe it, 70% of our LA Unified School District infrastructure was built over 50 years ago. And so what that means for our students, right, going in, is that they have a lot of outdated stuff. So Measure RR, if we extend this, again, it's not a raise on taxes. And so, and we need a, unlike other stuff, we need a 55% threshold. So it's not even just a simple majority. We need 55% yes on this. It will update school and learning technology. It will complete basic and necessary school site upgrades. And something very important to a lot of folks, right? Especially we know the environmental racism that happens, right? It's going to reduce and remove asbestos, lead paint, and water quality hazards in our schools, and so make better environments for our students, improve the accessibility and earthquake safety and school security. And most importantly, and one of the most important things I would say is just in COVID-19, it's going to upgrade our schools to COVID-19 cleanliness and so social distancing standards for students, faculty, and staff, right? So again, it's your tax rate will not increase with Measure RR. It's something that's local, that's direct impact here in LA and this anything LA Unified surrounding. So hopefully we can get a yes on RR and happy to answer any questions on that one.
Yes, I have a random question that you may or may not have the answer to, but is there a reason why some measures have like 2/3 majority or like 55-45 majority? Is that like intentional? Is there like a backstory to that, or is it just kind of random?
It just depends on the jurisdiction that it is and also what it does. So some things like an actual tax increase may require like a 2/3 threshold, or sometimes when it's extension, it could be 55%, right? And sometimes when it's to get someone elected, it might be just a simple majority. So it just depends on the jurisdiction and what it does, and whatever charter amendments have been done or whatever in that specific jurisdiction to require that. So for instance, back to Prop 22, something that Uber and Lyft did, and when they wrote yes on 22, they wrote into that if it passes, to undo it, the state would need 7/8 of all state legislatures to overturn it. So it's hard enough now to get like a majority or 2/3. So if you can imagine, they wrote it in that to undo Prop 22 at the state level with our elected officials to then vote in the state legislature, we would require a 7/8 majority to undo it. So that, and so sometimes local governments write in their own thresholds to make it harder or easier for certain things to pass.
Yeah,
so that's how it's done.
I've noticed that some things with a higher fiscal or financial impact sometimes require more of a vote.
That would make sense. It's that 7/8 thing is really crazy to me. Like, why are you wasting all of this toxic energy on trying to like mess us up? That's just crazy. Okay, so I think like in terms of voting, like obviously everyone should vote. You should do your civic duty, but obviously there are other ways to be a part of the movement besides voting. What would you say are some other ways to get involved besides casting your ballot?
So there are several ways, and depending on how much free time you could dedicate your time to getting involved, right? And just how passionate you are about any given subject. So there are different ways, right? One of them is to throw your own hat in the ring and run for something, right? I think some of the best candidates we've seen are people who say they will never run. Those are the folks that are always, the folks you have to push the hardest to run are sometimes often the best. So I would say anyone that's passionate about their community, passionate about change, should definitely consider running at some point, because those are the folks who are active in their communities, who care about them, who are invested and knowledgeable, and should run for something, right? So, and now's a great time. I think post 2016 and even more now, since the uprising earlier this year, and every time there's movement for social change, you see a new wave of leaders emerge and run. And so, you know, I would encourage folks to really consider running, right? 2022 is right around the corner. In fact, right after November 3rd, the planning for 22 starts, 2022. And so folks should really consider it. So that's one of them, right? We at the Federation, if there's any union members out there, we have a program called the Civic Leadership Academy, where we train union members how to run for free. We go through academy at the LA County Fed on training union members how to run for office, but also if you don't want to run, if you want to be involved in different capacity, you could uh, seek an appointment to a commission, right? There's different commissions you can get appointed to, and just or different seats you can try to get appointed to. So there's different ways, right? Of course, you can always volunteer with different campaigns or people. Like aside from voting, you can volunteer on campaigns. That's a good way to get exposed to that campaign life and see. And normally in non-COVID times, it's your time to get free pizza every chance you get at any of these volunteer events. COVID has us in our homes, volunteering from home, but volunteering also gives you a sense, right? Even phone banking, breaking through that and actually you learn a lot by having dialogue with voters at large. You get all kinds of personalities, all kinds of issues, and you learn a lot, right, about what people are going through. And so volunteering gives you different lenses and experience, and whatever capacity you're able to. I think volunteering is key. And just plug in, right? I think even just paying attention to your local city council meetings, as Rose mentioned earlier, sometimes people get away with it because they know you're not paying attention. So it's not always the sexiest thing to tune in 6 p.m. to live, C-SPAN like streams for local government, but it is important. I think there's some groups in Orange County, for instance, who started a cool social media campaign called like OC City Council Watch. They put the agendas for anything problematic that emerges in Orange County cities, and folks are paying attention and tracking in and engaging in public comment. But you can't let your local government get away with it. Get away with anything they're trying to do or plug in if you don't engage and sometimes pay attention and voice your concerns and ask questions. So that's another way to get involved, is just plugging into your local council meetings and just listening, tuning in, seeing what's going on. Again, sometimes not the funnest, but there's different, whatever your lane is, and whatever your interest and whatever it is, there's different ways you can plug into the electoral or governing side of politics.
Yeah, I definitely think that like the paying attention piece is really, really key. Which is why I wanted to do this series, because I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page as community. And so there's so much money at stake, like on the ballot, but also there's so much money at stake with everyone completing the census. And so I know that I feel like the deadline just came, like September 30th, but could you give like a quick update around the census and like why it will impact local funding and why it was so important to like get done?
So good news, Ashley, you can still do your census.
What?
So if you don't have to admit it to us, but if you haven't done it, Ashley, you still got a chance.
I did
it. So good news, you can still do it. So here's the thing. The Trump administration, in their long list of unscrupulous and disgusting things they've done, they actively fought to make sure our communities were not counted. So they were an active enemy in making sure that everybody who's watching tonight, everybody in our communities did not get counted, right? So recently they tried ending it September 30th after it had been extended to October 30th. It had been, folks sued, and it's now on a week-to-week appeal basis. So this week you can still get counted. So we're just going at it in the courts, right? It looks like it'll go through October 30th, but as of today, you can still do it. So definitely, if folks can, they should totally fill out at my census, gov.com, and make sure they get counted. So we've actively fought that. In LA County, we are now at a 65% count level, just shy of it. In 20, just for, it's every 10 years, right? So in 2010, we were at a 69% level. Okay, so we're still below our count level for 2010. Now, as you probably guess, it's not because we have less people, right? But you layer this on top of the fact that we are in a pandemic, so it's harder to count folks, right? The traditional method started late on the canvassing and what have you. We had an administration that was just hell-bent on making it hard for folks to get counted. They reduced funding. They messed with the guidelines. They try to scare the immigrant community, who, by the way, could get counted regardless of immigration status, right? They try to scare people into making sure they did not fill out the census. People are moving a lot because of the pandemic, right? So, they're going back to their hometowns. And then, there's been an increase in homelessness as well. So it's harder to count homeless folks who have been displaced. So there's a lot of factors that go into why we're not there, but there's been tremendous gains by partners, like including Community Coalition, right? Who have done great work to make sure a lot of specifically hard to count census tracts get counted. Now, why is it important, right? Well, the federal government is not, the Trump administration is not trying to get us counted because it doesn't matter, right? They're very intentional about why they don't want our communities to be counted. And it's a continuous racist attack on our communities, because the reality is that our communities of color are the most in need and need the most resources, and sometimes are the hardest to count. And so when we're hard to count, that means less resources come in, and it just continues a vicious cycle of lack of resources and funding, right? From parks, public safety, education, based on federal government money. So all the getting counted, just from even just a symbolic point of we count, right? As people, as communities, we count, but also just in terms of funding, making sure that we get what we deserve. So when there's lack of resources and funding, that's how we end up with food deserts, right? With green space deserts, with lack of city services, with lack of good jobs. And we've just become economically isolated. And we know what happens when systemic poverty is systematized in local areas, and what that creates. So it's very important we continue to outreach as much as we can and continue to bring those numbers up for as long as we have. And that's why we'll continue to appeal that. But secondly, I think one of the things that's missed, aside from all the resources that come when folks get counted, is actual representation in Washington, right? Mm-hmm. So when House of Representatives, our congressional seats, are based on population size. So if we are undercounted, there's a chance we lose seats, and everything when redistricting happens, that we actually lose representation if we have less count. So I know recently, more and more it's come to light how the fact that some of the Dakotas, for instance, have 2 US senators and have the same equal representation as 2 California senators, and you see the dysfunction in the US Senate, who's about to appoint and shove a Supreme Court justice down our throat, despite representing a very small minority of the country. And where we have a more representative voice by population size is in the House of Representatives. So just that's another wing to why it's important we get counted in the census, because that's how seats are determined at the congressional level as well in the House of Representatives. And effectively what those representatives do is are active lobbyists and representatives and voices in Washington to also make sure resources are brought back to our communities.
Yeah, I think like, I feel like I always hear people talking about like the resources, but like the representation is something that we have to elevate more so that people get like a bigger picture of why it's so important for us to fill our census. If you haven't filled out your census, go fill it out right now. It's really simple. It takes like 5 minutes. And I actually saw an enumerator the other day and I was like, wow, you're really still doing this during a pandemic. And so it's just so important. And we have to make sure that communities like ours are counted. And so I think today is the day that a lot of people start to get their ballots for the election. And so what I want to know is during this pandemic, first of all, we've heard so much about just like ballot fraud and like all of these different things. I just want to know like what the process is like voting in California. Like what's the vote by mail process? What's the process if you want to like go in on election day? Like what should we be planning to do?
Yes. And that's another attack, right? But I hate to say it, like a broken record, but that confusion is in part on the fraud, and everything is in part just a very intentional, strategic part of the federal government. You saw what they were doing with the U.S. Postal Service, right? And delaying and take boxes away. And it's just another coordinated effort to suppress our representation and voices. And so I'm glad you're asking that question and make sure folks are informed. So yes, today some folks began to receive, I think some folks began to receive it earlier in the weekend, and they begin to receive it. So and it's been designed so that folks receive their ballot 29 days before election day. And so a lot of people are encouraging, you have your, if you've already done your research, you've already checked out who you want to vote for, mail in your ballots as soon as you can and make sure it gets counted. There are 3 things. So how to return your ballot once you have it. I will say that if anyone who was registered, the governor did pass law that to make sure that everybody could vote by mail. So everybody that was registered before should be receiving one. And so you can return it by mail. No postage is necessary. And I would emphasize on all your ballots is that you sign the back. You must sign the back for it to be counted. So make sure you sign your ballots. Make sure you sign the back of it before you return it. So you could return it by mail. No postage is necessary. You could return it at any of the ballot drop-off boxes across LA County. You can find those at lavote.net. You can track and search where those Vote My Mail Dropbox locations are. Folks have probably started seeing them pop around different parts of the community. You can drop them off there, so that's an option. And you can also drop them off at any vote center in LA County. So vote centers will start opening, some of them 11 days prior to the election, and some of them 5 days prior to the election. So there's different ways to make sure that your ballot, you can drop them off if you're voting by mail. Now, if you are like me, and you're like an anxious person, you want to make sure things, you double verify, you check your pocket to make sure your cell phone is in there, even though you feel it, and you just want to make sure it's there. Good news, there's Where's My Ballot, where you can, california.ballottracks.net. And so if you just Google Where's My Ballot California, you'll come up with it. And that'll help you track your ballot. So you can see when your ballot's been mailed out, the delivery dates, and when it has been counted. So trifecta, you can see if it's been mailed out to you, if it's been delivered, and if it's been counted. So that's another way folks can really track it. And let's say you're also like me and you're a forgetful person and you forgot to sign it. Good news is you'll get your return envelope and you'll get a document called an unsigned ballot statement where you can asking for your signature. So because again, your signature is required to verify your identity in the process. And so you have up to 28 days after election day to return the statement for your ballot to be processed. So that's in case you forget to sign it. There is a mechanism. So again, I encourage track your ballot, make sure you sign it. There's multiple actions. And if for whatever reason you did not receive your ballot, you can call the registrar's office and make sure you get it. So plenty of options.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I actually just signed up for like the ballot tracks today. And I was like, wow, this is like getting a FedEx package or a UPS package. And so I feel a lot more reassured because the media was just making me paranoid about vote by mail. And it's purposely, like you were saying, like intentionally trying to suppress our votes. And so that's very important to know. So we all know the power of organizing here. And so what are some ways we can continue to hold elected officials accountable post-election? Because getting them in the position is just the first step of the whole process. How do we keep them accountable?
Yeah, you have to organize. You have to get up, get out, get informed, and then get other people informed to do what you feel you need to do to make changes. I think the first thing's plugging in. It's just start paying attention. It's not always fun. It's not always sexy. Sometimes it's really boring. But if you pay attention and you know, then you know where to go next if things are going in your direction or not. You have to make a plan to get involved, and then you have to bring other people with you. You can't just do it by yourself. Even if that other person's your roommate or your partner or someone in your house, I take my daughter, like take them with you, right? So you're passing on that system. And then we have to understand that, you know, elections are just a really tiny part of how change and stuff happens. The bigger fight and the long, tedious fight is what happens afterwards. To make change and to make sure it's the change you want takes a really long time. Sometimes we're talking weeks, months, sometimes we're talking generations, but people have to keep it up. And so I think that we have to understand it's a long process, and that, you know, it took a long time for us to have the right to vote, and then for that vote to be counted, and then for us to actually be represented, right? That happened over generations, and that's barely happening now. And so we really have to understand that when we're plugging in and organizing, that this is a lifelong commitment that we're making. And you can do it based on your lane and what your time commitment is. Find what you're passionate about and do that. If you're passionate about sitting in city council meetings, you know, there are some folks who really are. Do that, you know, once in a while. If you're passionate about making phone calls, do that. But I think the main thing is that you have to do something. You have to start demanding something, because we'll never get our power back unless we say something about it and speak up. And we can't be revolutions of one, right? We have to do this in a concerted, collective fashion with other people. There's inside strategies and outside strategies. We say that in our movement a lot. You know, you can talk to the elected officials inside and see how far you go and do visits with them. But sometimes you have to get loud and be outside, right? Sometimes you have to do that. And it takes both to really get what we want. And if you feel very strongly the political system is failing you, because I think there's an argument sometimes that could be made for that, right? The governor just vetoed a bunch of bills we fought for last week. Then maybe it is time for a revolution, right? It's time to start thinking differently and out of the box and figuring out what systems and plans we're going to think of and implement there. But know that even after revolutions happen, it takes time to get those systems in place. So what I'm saying is get involved, do what you feel is right, get others with you to hold the system accountable or to make a new system, and know that it's going to take a long time to make any of the change we need, and that your vote is just a small baby step. It's a little low risk, easy thing you can do, but it should be a starting point for the hard work that has to come outside. And it can't be done in front of a screen. It can't be done from our phone or a computer. Those are little parts. You really have to get up and get out and get talking to people and show up to things for us to really make the political changes we want, for the organizing to really happen. So pay attention, stay vigilant, and get involved in whatever you care about, big or small, and get others to go with you.
Amazing. So I think like that's all the questions I have. If anyone out there has a question, you can drop it in the comment box, and I'll give y'all a few seconds to do that by asking this question, and that is, what would you all say to those who are like disenfranchised or apathetic to voting, to really motivate them to just take this baby, small, low risk step, like you said, Rose?
I would say ask yourself, I have to do this to my own family, like who benefits when you don't care or when you're quiet? Who's really benefiting? Is it you? Right? And so that's what I ask, like who wants us not to vote? Who wants us not to know what's going on? Who wants us to not have a say and have a voice? Right? Because it's at a point now where we're getting stuff mailed to our house and we can do this from home. And I understand why people feel the system doesn't work for them. It's real. And if we're honest with ourselves, it very much most of the time does not. But that doesn't mean we just sit back and let it happen, right? Other people, bad powers benefit when we don't do something about it. And so I think it's important for people to know that they do have power. You have a little bit of control. And it starts with voting. And especially locally, you will see in short time the small impacts of what your voice is doing.
I would also add, Ashley, that if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't fight so damn hard to take it away and make it hard for you to vote. They continuously do that, right? And I think just from electoral, right, just the field I'm in politics and talking to elected officials and even just targeting, I've literally heard politicians say about any given demographic, well, they don't vote. That's how, one of the functions of an elected official, they're thinking about getting reelected. And so who do they cater to, right? There's a reason the younger generations continuously get screwed over, is because they don't count on young people voting, for instance. And think folks aren't paying attention. I almost said we, like I was still a youngin.
You're so young. You're so young. Seriously.
I almost lumped myself into but in terms of young folks, right? And so it is just important. So I think Rose is dead on in her assessment. But again, why do they make it so hard for folks to vote if it didn't matter?
I would also say like there are some folks who really, sorry for my children screaming in the background, they're having fun with each other. Some people really can't vote. And so us who have that right and that privilege, we have to ask others to vote our voice for us sometimes, or we as voters need to reach out to our community and say, how should we vote together, right? Collectively, and start thinking in that mindset, because there are a lot of people around us who legally cannot vote, but that doesn't mean they don't have a voice. We can all speak for each other and speak together.
That's amazing. Yes. And I think like that's the reason why I wanted to do this series, to make sure that, we're all in this together, and make sure that we come hard this election season, because we really we can flip the vote. We've seen it done before. And so we all just have to lean on each other, make sure we're informed, and like win. Like, I feel like that's like the bottom line. Like, I feel like the rallying cry, like La Lucha Sigue, like the fight continues, but like we can do this. Like we've had all of these, like just literally, I was just thinking about like how like the Voter Rights Act, like literally it's been within this like century that we have been, a lot of us have been actually able to vote. And so if we just continue having like small victories like that, like we can make this world a better place. And so I just want to thank Rose and Ugo for coming by and talking about local elections and why they're important. Do you all have any ways, like messages for people who want to learn more about what you all do at the Fed or want to tap into some of the work you do at the Fed, ways people can get connected?
Sure. So immediately we have our volunteer program. Of course, it looks different in the time of COVID, but if you go on the lafed.org, you can find out all our ways to plug in virtually for our endorsed candidates, and so on. If you want to stay plugged in and holding elected officials accountable, continue to stay plugged in with the LA Fed, because right after November 3rd, once we get folks elected, a yes vote, but then we continue to pass policy for workers and community alike, to make sure that they do right by the folks who voted and took that small step, and then hold them accountable on our front.
And you can check us out on social media. We have all the same handles on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's at the LA Fed. And so if you want to do more about the volunteerships, but if you also want to learn how we take action and take to the streets and support workers and community every day, you can follow us on those channels. And we're always plugging people in on what we're doing that day.
Amazing. Thank you so much again. I'm going to end this live, but you all should tune in to tomorrow's episode of this election series. We're going to be talking about the national election with the presidents and all of that good stuff. You're not going to want to miss it. Thank you so much for tuning in.